Welcome to Urgent Optimism, how to turn foresight into action. This is the fifth and final course in the specialization on futures thinking brought to you here on Coursera by the Institute for the Future. I am so glad that we've made it this far together. As you know by now, the goal of futures thinking is not to be able to accurately predict the future, because if you predict a future you don't want, then what good is it just waiting for that future to happen? Our goal instead is to get better at shaping and influencing the future. The more you think about the future and improve your foresight skills, the better you get at changing the future. And this course will help you turn all of the foresight skills you developed so far into plans for affecting the future and ways to influence and inspire other people to help you make the future that you want. We're going to talk about preferred futures, which are highly compelling, plausible ideas about how the future could be different. And you can use your preferred future to figure out what obstacles you'll have to fight, to recruit allies, to collect resources, to make action roadmaps. We're going to talk about how to make artifacts from the future, which are really creative representations of how everyday life could be different in the future. And these artifacts can provoke conversation and inspire other people to roll up their sleeves and get involved with you in making the future you want. We're going to have some of our leading artifact designers from here at the Institute for the Future show you some of their favorite artifacts and walk you through the creative process for how they created them. At the end of the course, you're going to have a chance to make your own action roadmap for the future, and you can even make a pledge to the future, which will be a commitment of your choosing to take some action right away to help influence your future that you are working on right now. I'm so glad you've made it this far. I'm really excited to take you on this last step towards the future. Our next step together is to work on a preferred future. I will see you in the next video for preferred futures. What's a preferred future? The best way I know to tell you what a preferred future is to show you one. So here's a preferred future I found recently when I was looking for signals related to drones, of all things. And you can see a photo of it here. The rideshare company Uber recently did a very interesting advertising campaign where they flew messages to drivers on drones. They drove the drones into parts of the city where traffic was really bad during rush hour. This was in Mexico City. And in a way, they were trying to reach drivers at their moment of peak frustration with messaging that said in Spanish, "If we all carpooled." And it said the city was made for us, not for 5.5 million cars. And this is both an advertising message, but also an illustration or an expression of a preferred future. Uber was presenting drivers with an alternative reality, if you will. A future in which, instead of having 5.5 million cars on the road, maybe there would only be 1 million cars on the road, and we would all get places faster and have more time for all the things we love to do in our favorite city, and spend less time behind a wheel. This is a vision that they hope will inspire people to use their new rideshare or carpooling app. So it's part of their business strategy, but it's also just a way to help people unstick their minds about the world they live in, to say, we don't have to drive the same way we've always driven. We don't have to organize our routines and habits the way we always have. And that's what a preferred future really is. It's saying, here's a vision of something that's very different from the way things are today, and I believe it's a better vision. This would be a better version of reality. Let me share with you the preferred future that I've been working towards for probably a decade now, to give you another illustration of how you might start to express an alternative vision of reality. So my preferred future is that I would like to see a game designer nominated for a Nobel Prize by the year 2023. And this is a preferred future I first shared in the year 2008. So back then, 2023 seemed really far away. I was like, oh, 15 years, that's plenty of time to achieve this future. Now that it's 2019, there's a little more urgency behind this vision, but we're still working towards it. And what does that vision mean to me? To me, it's a preferred future to imagine a world where a game designer is receiving a Nobel Prize nomination, because it means a few things. It means that games are recognized as a force for good in the world. It means that developers are working on games that have global impact in a positive way that might be measured. Positive impacts on mental health, or on empathy, or on reducing social conflict, or increasing global well-being. I like to imagine a world in which there are enough game designers working towards these kinds of positive goals, and there are enough organizations measuring their positive impact, that it would be totally plausible for a game designer to get a Nobel Prize. That people would say, game designers have done more to improve humanity's well-being than anyone else in the past year. So this is an example of a preferred future because, first of all, it describes what I want the future to be, not necessarily what I think the future will be. And this is an important distinction between making a prediction for the future or even making a forecast. So a forecast for the future, we try to describe something that seems plausible, we think it's realistic, that it might actually come to pass. A preferred future doesn't even have to be totally plausible yet. If it accurately describes a world you want to make and it can serve as that kind of guiding star for you, that is a good preferred future. And then our job is just to make it increasingly plausible and increasingly believable year by year. When I first started talking about Nobel Prize for game developers, people would laugh every time I said it. It seemed ludicrous. People described it as an absurd idea. Now there are tens of thousands of game developers working on games for peace and games for change and games for health, and there has been so much movement and progression towards that goal that and now it seems a little more plausible, but it might take time. It might take a decade for a preferred future to go from seeming like a fantastic vision to seeming plausible. Let me give you a few more examples of preferred futures. These aren't necessarily my preferred futures, but they are preferred futures held by futurists I know. And let's take a look at them and see what they might represent. Here's one. Half of all meat consumed globally by the year 2037 will be lab grown. So lab grown meat, as you may know, is meat that is grown not from a living animal, but from stem cells that are taken from a living animal, and then they can create real meat without a creature having to be born and live and die. So it's meat taken out of the animal cycle and grown in a laboratory instead. Now, why might this be somebody's preferred future? Well, there could be lots of reasons. The environmental impacts of growing meat are much lower in a lab than when you have to raise an animal and have massive farming infrastructure. The climate change impacts are reduced. It's less expensive. It's more sustainable for emerging economies to be able to afford the nutrition that they need. So there might be an economic factor. Maybe you feel that it's morally or ethically wrong to kill animals for meat when there might be an alternative that is equally nutritious. So there are lots of reasons why this might be someone's preferred future. And it's a good preferred future because it's clear as a goal. Half of all meat consumed will be lab grown. It puts a stake in the ground and it gives us something concrete to aim for. Here's another preferred future. By 2024, more virtual reality pain relief prescriptions are written than opiate prescriptions. So this has to do with the idea of using virtual reality to manage acute or chronic pain. There's a huge amount of research now showing that virtual reality can reduce or eliminate opiate prescriptions in many patients. Why might this be somebody's preferred future? Well, there are certainly many doctors who would like to see fewer side effects from opiate drugs. There are lots of physical and mental side effects from taking heavy pain prescriptions. So if you can reduce the side effects, people can get better faster. There's certainly a risk of addiction with certain pain prescriptions, and maybe virtual reality will prove less addictive than pain prescriptions. We don't know that yet, but it's a hypothesis that this future could test. And it might be more affordable even to have somebody use VR. People might be able to afford their health care and engage with it more proactively than taking a medical prescription. One more preferred future. In the year 2021, a new refugee convention is ratified by 150 different state parties. It replaces the 1951 Refugee Convention, providing protection to climate change refugees for the first time. So this is a preferred future that describes a particular policy that it would like to see enacted. It's a global treaty or convention that would change how people are treated around the world. Currently, climate change is not an eligible status for refugee status. You can't claim refugee status if you are fleeing your homeland because of conflict or environmental impact from climate change. So there's no recourse to move to a new country on those grounds. So if this is your preferred future, this is a way of saying we need to formalize and respond to this growing crisis that people are fleeing due to climate change. We need to recognize it and make it safer and easier for people to find safer ground. So those are all examples of preferred futures, and in the next video, we'll kind of break down the key pieces of a preferred future that help make your preferred future more inspiring, more provocative and conversation provoking, and more actionable for others. I'd love for you to start playing around with what might be a preferred future for you. You've been collecting signals around a future topic, you've been looking for drivers, you've been formulating scenarios about a future topic of your choice and making forecasts. I'd really like for you to start translating that into a preferred future that can help you define a course of action to shape and influence that future. So here are some tips for how you might design your preferred future. First, it should be positive. I think this is pretty obvious, but it's worth saying. This should be something that makes you feel excited, supercharged, optimistic. If this happened, this is your version of an epic win, a miracle, the best case scenario. Okay, so really go out on a limb and reach for the best possible outcome that you can imagine. Second, it should be specific. You want to make sure that you are grounding it in enough concrete details that somebody can really picture what this world looks like. When I talked about game designers making games that had more of a positive impact, I could have just said, in my preferred future, game designers try to make games that help the world. But that's kind of vague. It's a kind of an amorphous goal. You know, how will we know if we've achieved it? And so I started to play with it to make sure I could drive it to a point where it would feel really grounded. We would know if we woke up one day and saw the headline that a game developer has won a Nobel Prize. It's also time framed. It's nice to give people a year to work towards. On one hand, it expresses your sense of how near or far the vision is. Is this an amazing outcome we could achieve in the next year? Will it take 3 to 5 years? Will it take 10 years? Will it take 50 years? Will it take 100 years? And the next generation will have to be the one to follow through to achieve it. Put a stake in the ground in terms of time so that people can get a sense of really what kind of commitment and effort you think this will take. It should be different. This is really crucial. You should be describing something that feels fundamentally different from the reality we live in today. This is part of what makes preferred futures effective, is when they can kind of jostle people, kind of shake people up, and describe something that they've never encountered. Make sure that you are articulating some difference between the reality we live in today and the future you're trying to build. Just if you're trying to get more concrete or more specific, just make sure you're answering that question. How is this different from what we experience today? And lastly, this is the most important thing. You will know that you've gotten a good preferred future if you can say yes to this question, which is, have you described it so clearly that anybody could answer the question, has this happened yet or not? Yes or no? Have we achieved it? Yes or no? And so if you think about some of the preferred futures we looked at in the last video, they were concrete enough that you could look around the world and say, is half of all meat consumed lab grown? Is it only a quarter? Is it only 10%? It's a goal that you could take stock of the world and say, yes or no, we are there yet or we're not there yet. Has the treaty been ratified by at least 150 countries? Oh, it hasn't been written yet. It's only 20 countries. It's only 70 countries. It's been written but not signed. You can look at where you are and say, yes or no, has this happened? So make sure that anybody who is reading your preferred future could look at it and say, yes or no. This is kind of the trickiest part, and when I work with students a lot of the time, this is the last thing to kind of click into place. You can say that you want to live in a world where people have less stress, but how will you know it? How will you measure it? How will you be able to say, yes, we have arrived in this future? So as you start to play with drafting your own preferred futures, make sure you pay special attention that you can say, yes or no, are we in this future yet? Preferred futures are great because they can inspire people to believe that change is possible, to imagine a better world. But they're not just about imagination and inspiration, they're very practical too. There are 3 things that you can do after you have identified your preferred future to help you figure out what you can do today to make that future more likely. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps after you've defined your preferred future that can help you start to identify the resources and allies and obstacles that you will be interacting with as you make this preferred future real. So here is the first step. The first step to work backwards from your preferred future to today is to identify any existing processes or systems that are already moving in the direction of the future that you want. So you're looking essentially for the allies, the easy wins, who else is out there, what else is out there that could give momentum to this idea. And then when you've identified them, the second part of the step is to ask yourself, what can I do to enhance these processes or maintain them? What kind of support or resources or attention do all of these things that are already moving us in the direction of the future I want need to stay engaged and keep working? So thinking about my preferred future of wanting to see a Nobel Prize for a game designer by the year 2023, I might look around for other people who are striving to create games and bring attention to games that have a major positive social goal as their primary purpose. So I could identify, for example, the organization Games for Change, which is a nonprofit organization based in New York City that holds a festival every year to bring attention to games that are designed for positive social impact, to increase peace, to improve people's safety, their ability to access healthcare. There's so many positive goals that game developers have. And that's a group that I might want to join forces with. And in fact, after I created that preferred future, I went and joined the board of directors for that organization and started helping with their festival. So that was just one way that I could look around for things that are also working and join forces and help support them in moving forward. The second step, when you're working backwards from a preferred future, is to identify any existing processes or systems or beliefs that definitely are standing in the way of your preferred future. And then you're going to try to brainstorm how these obstacles could be overcome, or how the resistance could be reduced, or how you could intervene and change people's beliefs so that these are no longer preventing your preferred future from becoming real. In the case of trying to increase the amount of good that games are doing in the world and increase their acceptance as a tool for positive change, I've certainly identified stereotypes about games and people's anxieties about games as either being antisocial or addicting and therefore bad for mental health or bad for social health. I could identify those stereotypes and beliefs as an obstacle. And so what I did in working backwards from my preferred future is I realized there needed to be more scientific research published in peer-reviewed scientific journals looking more rigorously at these questions. I didn't necessarily know what the science would find, but I figured it would be better to have more science and, if possible, to shine a light on the specific positive impacts that games could have so that game developers could go forth with confidence and Nobel Prize nominators could nominate in confidence. The last step, as you are working backwards from a preferred future, is to start thinking of things that don't exist, new systems, new processes, new organizations or practices that could help you achieve your preferred future. And as you start to imagine these, you want to start to think about who could build them, who could maintain them, who could nurture them. And this is where you just try to think about the new things you could bring into the world that would make this future more real. In the case of trying to get a game developer to create a Nobel Prize-worthy game, it occurred to me that one institution or practice that would be helpful would be to create a global game jam for good. Now, in the game industry, game jams are when game developers take a weekend to camp out together. You might get 100 game developers all camping in the same office building for the same weekend, and they form teams and they all make a game on a certain theme. They have 48 hours to think of it, make it, ship it, play it, and then all the games get shared online. And oftentimes you'll have people all over the world doing a game jam at the same time. And it seemed to me that if we could start a game jam specifically with the idea of everybody making a game to achieve a particular positive impact, that this would be a new habit or practice that wouldn't be too hard to institute because game developers already know how to do it, but we'd be moving things in a positive direction. So that's also been a step that I've been able to take to help move reality towards the future I want to make. So as you're really living with your preferred future, these 3 steps can help you make it real, make it feel like more than just a fantasy for what you want to happen, but actually finding all of the concrete elements of today that will help you make it more real, that will get in the way, or that need to be brought into existence by you. Your preferred future is not just about imagining, it's about taking action, and these 3 steps can help you figure out what actions you want to take today. Before we finish up this week, I want to share with you one more fun way that you can bring a preferred future to life. And this technique is called Headline from the Future, or as I like to think of it, Good News from the Future. And let me show you how it works. I am here today to bring you good news from the future. In fact, it's good news from the year 2041. Let me share with you the big news story that is going viral. Everybody's talking about it. Here we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Bill of Space Rights. These are the Bill of Rights for people who have gone into space to colonize space for human beings. This is a set of amendments that was added to the original Outer Space Treaty of 1967. If you have never heard of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, you should take a look. It is a fascinating document that defines how nations can act in space It forbids nations from putting weapons into space. It's a very important document, but it was created in 1967, which was years before we started seriously trying to colonize space. So we needed in 2021 to adopt a Bill of Rights to make sure that people would be safe and equitable and thrive, not just in space, but also back on Earth. If you were to look at this news story, you would see all the wonderful details that describe the collective accomplishments of the more than 50 countries who ratified this Bill of Space Rights Amendment. The main thing it ensured is that half of all profits from commercializing space, all of the resources that were mined and all of the advances that were made, half of those profits are divided equally across the Earth's 8 billion remaining citizens as a universal dividend. This is how we came up with universal basic income. We paid it out through the wealth created through space research and colonization. Of course, the Bill of Space Rights ensures that weapons are continued to be banned, which have led to 2 decades of war-free, conflict-free space exploration. So this is my good news from the year 2041. And this is an example of trying to help people immerse themselves in your preferred future. What will people be talking about? What accomplishments will they be celebrating? What good news will we be waking up to in a world where your preferred future has come to pass? There's actually a tool that you can use in our Equitable Futures Toolkit, which you got to play with in the last course in the specialization. The tool is called How to Headline the Future, and I'll just walk you through those steps really quickly, and then of course you can use the tool to headline any future that you want. The first step is just to brainstorm a list of possible future headlines. Something that might be a critical, newsworthy accomplishment. It's articulating what your success will look like in a newsworthy way. Come up with a few different ones. Pick one you want to go with. Then write a provocative, 1-sentence version of it. That becomes your headline. Maybe you want to then follow up by writing the first paragraph, go through the who, what, when, where, how, and why, bring it to life, and then where it really gets fun is sharing it with the world. You can post your news from the future on social media. You can send it around to a mailing list at work. You can make a newspaper and hang it up in public out, as a piece of installation in the wild. Share your good news from the future as a way to plant seeds in the minds of people all around you of what might be possible. Make sure that you get that tool. It's in the Equitable Futures Toolkit. Play around with it. You've defined a preferred future for yourself. Now it's time to share the good news from the world in which you made that future real. This course on urgent optimism is all about figuring out how you can take action to make your preferred future real. One of the tricky things about changing the future is that sometimes you're working against culture. You have to change people's beliefs or feelings about a certain possibility, a certain technology or a policy or direction. You have to make them feel more optimistic or more excited about a future, or you have to change their minds. You have to move them away from a future they're excited about. You have to convince them that the risks are real, that there is something dangerous we need to avoid. Because when we build our futures as a society, we're often influenced by stories that are being told in books, in movies, in comics, in games, in our policy conversations. We tell these stories about what the future might be like, and that can really influence people's decisions to support a future or to avoid a future. So what we're going to talk about this week are how do you identify the prevailing images of the future, and specifically images that might be relevant to the future you're trying to make, so you can think about maybe what different kinds of stories need to be told, or what different kinds of images need to be presented so that you can get people behind your vision for the future. Let's take a look at some iconic or classic images of the future, and then we can talk a little bit more about the role that images of the future play. So an image of the future, it's any cultural or artistic expression of what the future might be like. And one of the most iconic images of the future that often pops into people's minds, especially if they grew up in the United States. So if you're not familiar with this, be sure to Google it, and you can watch a little video online to get a flavor of it. But one of those most iconic images is a cartoon called The Jetsons, which presented a really optimistic utopian image of the future in which robots do all our work for us and we get to zip around the world in flying cars. And this was really a vision of a very polished, clean, technology-driven future where all of our lives would be made easier and more fun by these amazing technological inventions. And a vision like this of the future can really help people kind of buy into that belief that new technologies will make our lives better. We don't have to be afraid of them. On the other hand, there's a very popular image of the future that has emerged over the past couple of years, a television series called Westworld. And again, if you haven't seen this, it's a great one to look for. Google some videos, read a little bit about Westworld. This is an image of the future that imagines very realistic, human-seeming robots that can interact with us, that we can go into these theme parks where we can do anything we want with these very human-seeming robots, fulfill all of our darkest fantasies. And this is definitely more of a dystopian vision of the future where our basest impulses might be brought to bear and where also the robots might rise up and try to kill us. This image of the future really makes people think twice maybe about artificial intelligence and how much we want to embrace it. What will robots living amongst us do to our society? And it speaks to a certain cultural anxiety about these trends. People who are really steeped in this image of the future might be more cautious about embracing these technologies. We've seen historically lots of books that represent really compelling images of the future. Things like George Orwell's book, 1984, which was really a vision of a certain type of surveillance and propaganda. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which envisioned a world of escapism to avoid the dystopian world that we live in through drugs and other escapist means. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which imagines what a repressive society might look like in the future. Today, we're seeing a lot of science fiction grappling with images of the future that have to do with broadening our horizons as a species. Some of the most popular images of the future in science fiction today are about communicating with aliens and first contact with alien species, the three-body problem coming out of China being one of the great examples of it. We often talk about movies as playing an important role in creating images of the future. Most famously, I think within the future forecasting community, the movie Minority Report is often referred to as the movie that predicted the future because the people who created the special effects for some of the technologies actually founded companies to build the technologies that they simulated for the movie, which is another interesting way that images of the future can actually shape the future. Just by creating a realistic and compelling visualization or story about a particular technology, you may inspire somebody to dedicate their career and their resources to making it real. We can see images of the future in political speeches and in social activism. Famously in the United States, the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., which articulated a vision of the future with less prejudice, less racial bias. That was a particular optimistic image of the future that was used to inspire people to get involved with social change in the United States. In religious documents, we can often see visions and images of the future. For example, visions of apocalypse or ways that things might end. And we can also see in graffiti, people's expressions about how they feel about the future. One of my favorite future images that really blurred the lines between reality and the future was a project called futuresealevel.org, where you could order a spool of blue tape and you could research where the sea level might be in the future if you lived on a coastal community, and you could mark it. And so people could actually see 10 years in the future, the water level is expected to be, here at my knees or here at my waist or here at my chin, and actually provoke people to imagine their physical environment changed in the future. What's interesting about all these images of the future is that they can tell us a lot about essentially the beliefs and assumptions and emotions of society. There's a book called The Image of the Future that many futurists refer to that was written in the 1960s by Fred Pollock. And he wrote that the rise and fall of images of the future often precedes or accompanies the rise and fall of cultures. As long as a society's image is positive and flourishing, the flower of culture is in full bloom. Once the image begins to decay and lose its vitality, the culture does not long survive. So he was of the opinion that while we have really positive images of the future, we're actually headed in that direction. We're more likely to achieve positive change. And when we start having dark, apocalyptic images of the future and telling stories about how the future goes terribly wrong, we are actually headed into a period of decay and decline. This is not necessarily true. This is a hypothesis about images of the future. At the Institute for the Future, we think that you can use both positive images of the future and also more dystopian or apocalyptic images of the future, a future in decline, to create positive change. Sometimes we need to look at more disturbing images of the future to rally us to make a change today. I'd like to point you, as you're thinking about images of the future, to one of my favorite images of the future, which is from the year 1947. And it was a special issue from the magazine Popular Science, where they asked scientists to show off what they thought the biggest breakthroughs in science would be in the coming decades. And there's this beautiful portrait gallery that you'll be able to click through the materials for this course to take a look at. And it was really about scientists trying to grapple with the fact that they had just created the atomic bomb, which had led to terrible loss of life and destruction to humanity. And what you can see are scientists essentially trying to rethink what their role in society could be, to say, we want to be a force for good, we want to make things that create and build up humanity and not destroy humanity. And it's a really beautiful moment to see the purposeful and strategic use of images of the future to try to change direction for society. So we'll share that link with you so you can take a look and see. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take a look at some of the leading images of the future that are popular today and talk about the work that they might be doing and how you might get involved in retelling those stories and rethinking those images. Here's an image of the future that is literally just an image. This is an illustration that appeared on the cover of New Yorker magazine a couple of years ago. And when I first saw it, I was really struck at what a kind of balanced image of the future it was. I feel like it raises some kind of beautiful, hopeful feelings about the future, but maybe some people would interpret it as things being lost or something sad about this future. And I want to invite you to look at this illustration now with me and see what you see in it and what kind of future it evokes for you. You know, we see a young woman in a tent. She's in nature, and she's reading. She's reading a book, a physical book, a kind of traditional book, and she's reading it by the light of what seems to be her smartphone. And this is such an interesting picture because it combines kind of duality. Here's a woman in nature, but she's not in nature. She's looking at her phone, but she's not just looking at her phone. Really, she's using her phone to look at a book, which is the kind of traditional technology. And I just love how this image infuses all the different levels. It kind of speaks to our tension. You know, are we in the real world or are we in the virtual world? Are we losing our classic art forms like physical books to digital only or virtual only artifacts? And this image, it just seems to speak to maybe a balance in the future where we're both in the physical world, but we're also in the virtual world where we have digital tools, but we also have our traditional tools and forms of engagement as well. And I just think it holds those questions of the future in balance in a really elegant way. So I wanted to share that with you. And then if we actually open the pages of the magazine a little further, there's a wonderful essay that we'll link to in the course materials about the role of dystopian images of the future in the times that we live in today. I think if you were to ask most professional futurists what images of the future predominate today, you would see that there's a lot of dystopian storytelling, that there are young adult series like The Hunger Games, which are set in just terribly dystopian futures. There are TV series like Black Mirror, where every episode looks at a different technology, from augmented reality to facial recognition to virtual reality, and imagines really kind of awful scenarios where we've really lost a major part of our humanity in accepting these technologies. So dystopians are quite common now. In this New Yorker article, it asks if dystopian images of the future are helpful. Right? So let me just read you a little bit from this. And of course, I invite you to read the whole thing. The author Jill Lepore writes, "Dystopia used to be a fiction of resistance. It's become a fiction of submission, the fiction of helplessness and hopelessness. It cannot imagine a better future, and it doesn't ask anyone to bother to make one. It requires so little by way of literary, political, or moral imagination, asking only that you enjoy the company of people whose fear of the future aligns comfortably with your own." And I find this a really challenging idea, that we have stopped telling stories about the future that ask people to take action, and we just tell these horrible stories as if we're just bracing for the worst. And there have been some interesting projects to fight against this that I wanted to share with you. For example, in response to the television series Black Mirror, there was a project called White Mirror, where storytellers of all kinds, writers and game designers and filmmakers and comic book artists, were invited to come spend a weekend together flipping the script on the Black Mirror series, to take every episode and every technology that Black Mirror examined through a kind of dystopian lens and tell a positive story, to describe a world in which this technology had brought benefit to many. And so they created their own virtual experiences and their own short films and their own short stories. And this was a really interesting example of using future thinking to maybe change the conversation, to change the prevailing imagery, so that we're not just stuck in a feeling of anxiety about the future, but that we actively start to fight against images that might prevent us from taking action and populate the world with images of the future that inspire us to take action. Another project that tried to intervene into this sense of helplessness about the future was a project called Surging Seas Mapping Choices. And this was a tool, an app that you could download on your phone that would allow you to picture the changing sea levels and effects of climate change wherever you live in the world, but it would allow you to show different versions of the future depending on what actions were taken today. So depending on how carbon outputs changed, or what policies were adopted, or what lifestyle changes were made at a societal level, you could see more or less harm to your city or your local environment. And the way they described it was, this is a story about the future that can have different endings, and the endings depend on what we do. So we can create interactive images of the future that allow people to really hone in on and identify the actions we take that change the ending of the story. In the next video, we're going to talk about one more technique you can use besides just looking for images of the future, which is useful information, and besides just changing the story about the future. I want to give you one more tool for you to assess the relative optimism or pessimism about a particular technology or social direction, and give you a strategy for helping people move in the direction of imagining a future they want. See you there. This future thinking technique actually comes from a technique that is more often practiced in the field of psychology. So let me tell you about that technique and how we've adapted it for future thinking. This is called the +1 technique, and it's a way to connect more meaningfully with people in your social network. Instead of just liking a comment that they posted, or even just leaving a comment on a photo that they shared, what can you do to connect more deeply and create a more sustainable social relationship? So the way the trick works is you send a message to somebody, you text them, you email them, and you say, how is your day going on a scale of 1 to 10? Then you wait for them to give you a number. And whatever number they send back, 2, 3, 8, you immediately write back and say, is there anything I could do to move that up +1? Like anything I could do right now to take it from a 3 to a 4, or a 5 to 6, or a 9 to a 10? And this just kind of opens the window for your friend to ask you for a little bit of help, or to just get something positive from you that you can actually intervene in their day and have a positive effect, and allows you to talk more specifically about what's going on and what might make it better for you. So this is a really powerful technique. I encourage you to use it just, for fun in your own social relationships, but you can adapt it for future thinking as well. And here's how that adaptation works. After somebody has seen an image of the future, maybe they have heard your preferred vision of the future, maybe they've read a scenario, maybe they've watched an immersive video, maybe they've just watched an episode of Black Mirror or read a short story about the future. What you simply ask them is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic do you feel after seeing this image of the future? Where 1 would be, I feel terrible, this is a dystopia, I feel horrible about our future. And 10 would be, I'm so energized, I love this future, I can't wait for this future, I believe this future can happen, and I am so excited to get there. And so you just want to gauge how this image has made them feel. After they've given you a number, then you start a conversation. Is there anything you can think of that would move you +1 on that spectrum? If you are at a 1 and you are just terrified or anxious about this future, what would make you feel at least a 2? Or if you're at an 8 or a 9, what would make you feel a 10? And this is a way of starting a conversation about what are the levers that we have to push on the future, or what safeguards or regulations would make us feel less anxiety about the future, or what actions would help an image of the future be maybe less overwhelming and feel more livable to us. So think about the image of the future that you watched in the last course, the course on collaborative forecasting. You watched an immersive scenario about the Feel That social network that would use all sorts of biosensing and neurosensing technologies to share your feelings and thoughts with a social network, your friends, your family, or the public. So I would ask you now, on a scale of 1 to 10, looking at that image, how did it make you feel about the future? Did it make you feel super optimistic that empathy-building technologies are coming and they're going to make the world a better place? I'm at a 10. Or are you at a 1? This is going to make us just worse as a society. We're going to get addicted to other people's feelings. We're going to lose privacy. Where are you on that 1 to 10? And if you have a number, then I would like to ask you, what change in that story, or what action in the world around you what question could be answered that would at least move you up a +1, so that you feel a little more positive about that image that you were just encountering. For me, when I think about the Feel That network, I am definitely interested in regulation, I guess. I would just love to see possibilities and conversations about how would we package feelings, or what would be, is there anything it would be illegal to share? Would there be ratings on feelings the way movies are rated for, okay for kids or for adults only? I would love to just start a conversation about what are the possibilities to package or advise or regulate, so that we're not just constantly blasted by whatever feelings people want to evoke and provoke in the future. Just even that conversation starting would move me up a +1. So that's a technique. It's called +1, and it's a way for you both to gauge someone's relative positive feelings about the future versus their shadow imagination, and to start talking about ways that we can take even the most dystopian images of the future and use them to spark hope and action towards a better future.
The future marches on. Dateline Brazil. Last year's election of retired football superstar Ronaldo as Brazil's new president came with a penalty shot of controversy. Orkut, the overwhelmingly dominant social network in the country, was the overseer of the election process, even as Ronaldo was the face of Orkut. Now that the new administration is firmly in charge, President Ronaldo is using the social network as the backbone of a series of experiments to make the Brazilian government more effective and responsive. According to the new playbook, legislative meetings need to take place over group video chat, and all public officials must be available via the social network, with priority given to constituents directly affected by the officials' decisions. Orkut and Brazil aren't the only state-based social networks out there, but this combo has gone farther than anyone else. China and WeChat are still working hand in hand, while LinkedIn has become the political platform of the global south. Dateline Ottawa. If your household electronics have the personality worm, look out. Security experts say that the malware infecting millions of Internet of Things devices around the world is more dangerous than it seems. The worm does more than give your refrigerator and thermostat personalities. It's spyware designed to monitor activity and conversations in homes. And who's behind the nefarious code? The Canadians. The Canadian government has been pegged as the source of the malware, known officially as the Dancer virus. The goal of this digital misadventure was to build a secret observation network. The Ottawa government claims that it was meant only to infect devices in hostile states. But through malice or mistake, the Dancer personality worm can now be found worldwide. Why Dancer? Cybersecurity eggheads say it's a new kind of observation. Not surveillance from above or surveillance from below, but danceveillance, observation from within. Whatever the term and however the software got loose, the Canucks did one thing right. People love that their household devices now argue, flirt, and tell jokes. Snap polls suggest that over 40% of infected homes don't want to get rid of the wiggly worm. Dateline Shenzhen. How much does this doodad cost? Look again. The latest gadgets and gears on the shelves of the mega markets in China don't have a price tag. They have a price stream. Is this the lowest price? Wait a minute and check again. Economists claim that shopping agents are the cause of this mixed-up marketplace. Not just shopping bots bidding on the latest hardware, but algorithmic traders exchanging currencies hundreds of times a second. The price in dollars, euros, and RMB shift with the markets. How do you keep up? The live price displays show you the current cost, and your shopping bot in your phone handles the negotiation. That robo-razor looks like dangerous fun to me. But if price streams aren't enough for you, Just wait. Now on the horizon, mixed pricing, where the best price comes from an optimal combination of currencies. How much are those new Vert glasses? $50, or half that with the right mix of dollars, Bitcoin, and World of Warcraft 2 platinum pieces. Stay safe out there as the future marches on.
What are artifacts from the future? Well, an artifact from the future is any everyday object or specific concrete detail about the future that you can really make and bring to life and put into today to provoke conversation and imagination about the world we might live in. And the best way to explain artifacts are just to show you some. So you may recall earlier in the specialization, we talked about a scenario involving surveillance toilets. We talked about smart toilets that could detect everything from drug use and medications to stress levels and pregnancy hormones. And we talked about a world in which this technology might be used not just at home for you to help monitor your health, but also in public settings, in schools, in workplaces. And we asked how you might feel in a world where every time you use a bathroom, somebody might be learning something about your physical or mental health, your everyday behaviors. And you may recall that we said we actually have a sign at the Institute for the Future in our public restrooms that are essentially artifacts from this future. These signs read, "Attention, the toilet you are about to use is under the surveillance of our local city and our state, and your input may be analyzed. The data may be sold and shared. We may combine it with facial recognition so that we can contact you about your contributions if we need to," right? This sign is in a real restroom, and it's there to create that real visceral, immersive intuition about what it might feel like to walk into this future someday. We don't want to just offer up an abstract, hypothetical idea about the future. We want to make it concrete. Okay? And that's what an artifact from the future is. And you can take it one step further. Once you have one artifact, it might inspire another. This is an artifact that was inspired by that sign. This is called the Smart Toilet Biometric Privacy Spray. And we actually have this in our public restrooms on the table with, the hand soaps and the perfumes. And this artifact from the future promises to mask all of your DNA, hormone, drug, nutrient, and health markers if you spray it in the toilet before you flush. Now, this is not a real product that exists today, but it could very well be a product that would exist in a future where surveillance toilets are common. So you can imagine creating a whole ecosystem of signs and objects and products and services and advertisements that might exist in a given future, and putting these out into the real world to provoke these moments of, whoa, I can really feel or imagine that future. And sometimes there can be a little uncertainty about whether this artifact is real or not. We usually try to put indications, whether it's an Institute for the Future logo or a URL that they can go to learn more about the scenario, or we might put a date from the future, manufactured April 1st, 2025, to let people know that this is a future scenario. But there's always the risk when you put something real in the real world that somebody will mistake it for real. And we had a really interesting experience with one of our future artifacts recently. One of my colleagues, Jake Dunnigan, who you will get a mini masterclass from shortly in immersive futures, he had some of his students make artifacts for the urban environment, and one of the artifacts they made was a very convincing looking sign that read CRISPR Free Campus. They posted it by Stanford University, and the sign says that violators will face criminal penalties, no exceptions, if you use CRISPR technology. And this is imagining a future in which a technology that certainly is raising some ethical concerns today, has been banned for research. And CRISPR, as you may know, this is a DNA altering technology. It allows scientists to precision target specific DNA sequences, and it's currently being investigated as a way to prevent certain diseases or to prevent genetic defects, but it's also being controversially thought about possibly as a way to create sort of super able humans, maybe designer babies. There's a lot of uncertainty about how accepted this technology will be in the future. So this sign that you see here, this was put up by our offices, by Stanford University. And one of the things that was really nice about this artifact is it has a piece of graffiti attached to it, that on top of the sign saying it's CRISPR-free campus, there's a pro-CRISPR sticker stuck right on top of the sign that says "Make Life CRISPR." So it's like a kind of a very deep artifact that's working on two levels. In this future, CRISPR has been banned, but there's like a resistance movement, people who want CRISPR, and they're going around graffitiing the anti-CRISPR signs with pro-CRISPR graffiti. What was interesting is that we had a moment of confusion in the community where some members of the community interpreted the graffiti as real, and they thought, heck no, we too are anti-CRISPR, and they removed the pro-CRISPR sticker whenever it was applied. So there was a kind of resistance within the real present day to this imagined artifact of the future. And this is just like a really nice example of how that kind of blurry line between today and future can be explored productively by artifacts. This is a really immersive technique. Artifacts don't have to be real. They don't necessarily have to be in the physical environment. You may recall the scenario that the next artifact I'm about to show you is from. This is the EduLedger scenario where anybody can teach anyone anything and give them a learning credit. So you would have watched this scenario a few courses back. And when we first presented this scenario, we actually created a digital artifact where if you engage with the scenario, if you shared with us some positive and shadow imagination about the scenario, we sent you this artifact. It was your first EduBlock. You earned +1 in foresight from the Institute for the Future, and it was this kind of fully designed artifact with your own EduBlock address, and it could kind of help you imagine what it would be like to receive EduBlocks in this future on your personal device. So it doesn't have to be physical. As long as you can get it out into the world and have people interact with it, you can provoke these really immersive and provocative experiences of the future. In the next video, I'll show you some more examples of some artifacts that have provoked a lot of conversation here at the Institute for the Future. And then we're going to let you meet some artifact designers and have them walk you through their creative process. Welcome back. Here are some more artifacts from the future. You will probably recognize this artifact, which is from the Feel That Future scenario. After we created that immersive video, we wanted people who watch the video to be able to actually put one of these neurosensing devices on as a way to really think about what would it mean to allow a technology access to your thoughts and feelings, and just that the mere act of putting it on and wearing it kind of help people get into that. And we actually encourage people to take selfies with it and share on social media, so we could extend the conversation about neurosensing tech even further and spread through their social network some of the conversation about, would you join a social network that could read your thoughts and share your feelings? This is an artifact called 46 and We Compatibility Tester, and this was inspired by research into how DNA profiling and genetic information might change our dating practices in the future. It's based, of course, on 23andMe, which is a popular genetic information service today where you can find out about your own DNA. We imagined in the future that you might have a home kit where anybody that you're dating, you're thinking about possibly having a long-term relationship with or having children with, you just need to grab a strand of their hair and you can analyze it against your DNA to see if there's good compatibility, if when your genes combine, you're likely to have a happy, healthy kid. And it outlines on the back all the things it can look for: susceptibility to 30+ gene-linked diseases, baseline inclination to things like religiosity or political extremism, male pattern baldness, anything that you might want to judge. And it's a sort of a provocative idea. I mean, do we really want to be evaluated against that? But if that information is available, people might use it. This is the Intention Viewers eyewear. So this product is imagined to be an augmented reality pair of eyeglasses that when you put them on, you can get artificial intelligence about the emotions and thoughts and feelings and whether somebody's lying or telling the truth. They use the cameras and the algorithms to detect little changes in microexpressions, the little muscles moving that indicate whether someone is deceptive, whether they might be sexually interested in you, whether they think you are a good person, or whether they have suspicion about you. And so that's really compelling information to have. That's a possible artifact that might exist in the future, but of course, one artifact might inspire another. We figure that if this product existed, you would also have a product called the Intention Spoofer, which would be contact lenses that you could wear that would essentially inhibit the ability of this kind of algorithm to accurately detect your thoughts, feelings, and motivations. So oftentimes these artifacts, they come in ecosystems. And what do you do with artifacts like this? Just put them out anywhere people might be gathering. We put them out when we have a coffee break. We put them on our shelves. We have displays in our windows. We take them to events. If you have an artifact that you're interested in creating, and you'll get some tips for how to create a good artifact in the next video, just think of it as a conversation starter. It's a piece of art that you can bring to any environment to stimulate conversation about a new technology, about a possible scenario, and you can really bring it to life for people. In the next video, we're going to talk about just some tips for starting to brainstorm your own artifact for the future. Now that you've seen lots of different artifacts from the future, you're probably feeling it is time to make your own. And I want to leave you with some tips for figuring out, where do you get started? What is the creative process going to be like for you? So here are some of the prompts that I use when I'm working with the team to try to come up with a new artifact for the future. I hope you find them helpful. First tip, one way to think about a new artifact is just to pick a room of the house and think about what might exist in that room in a particular scenario in the future. For example, a bedroom, the kitchen, a bathroom, a nursery, a back deck or patio. Pick a very specific space within the home environment and ask yourself what might exist in this space in a given scenario or future. You might pick a public venue, a school, a church, a hospital, a restaurant, the zoo, a bus, an airplane. Pick a kind of collective or communal space and ask yourself, what might exist in this space that doesn't exist today in the future in a given scenario or forecast? Another good prompt is an event. So pick a common holiday or celebration or milestone, and how might that be different in a given scenario or forecast? How might weddings be different in this future, or the birth of a child, or a birthday party, or a retirement party, or a first date? So pick any kind of really common, universal experience or milestone and think about what might exist in that future. You could also pick an everyday activity. Brainstorm things like, how would getting dressed be different in this future? How would calling your mom be different? Eating dinner, using a dating app, work check-in with your boss, attending a religious service, receiving a package, cooking dinner. how might this everyday, ordinary thing that people relate to, how might that be different in a given scenario? The last thing that I do that can be really helpful for just thinking creatively of things you would never think otherwise is a kind of reverse scavenger hunt. I have people who are going to be making artifacts go out and collect a bunch of objects, not knowing what they're going to do with them, and bring them back. And it'd be everything from, an apple to a book to a shoe to a voting document, anything that you might be collecting, a credit card statement. Bring back the objects, and then we take a specific scenario or future forecast and we say, okay, how might this actual concrete object be different in this scenario? What does an apple look like in this future? What does a shoe look like in this future? And this can create some really interesting ideas where you're thinking about ordinary things, but in really extraordinary contexts. Once you start zeroing in on a space or a social context or a room or an object, and you're starting to bring your artifact to life, there are just a few key questions that can help make sure that you're bringing it to life with enough vividness that somebody could really immerse themselves in this future. If it's an object, it should have a name. What is this called? Is it a service, a product, a company? Is it a resistance movement? Having an actual concrete name for it can be really helpful. Who would use this object, or who would create this object and why? So think about the people behind it or the people around it. It's not just the thing, but there are people whose lives and motivations and goals and values are influencing it. Make sure you can identify what new technology or new reality make it possible or necessary. Artifacts shouldn't be fantastical magic objects like out of Harry Potter. It's not some magical wizard's tool that can do anything that you want. This is something that exists because of a particular change that has happened, whether it's a new technology or a scientific breakthrough or a new rule or policy or law or practice. Make sure it's grounded in something concrete and real. And then ask yourself, what problems does this solve? And because we always use shadow imagination alongside our positive imagination, what new problems might this artifact create? And the more artifacts you create and the more kind of in-depth questions you ask about your artifacts, the richer your scenarios will get, the more provocative your forecasts will get, and the more people will pay attention to your ideas about what the future could and should be.
My name is Nick Whitinger. I work with the Institute for the Future, and I've been creating artifacts from the future, such as these, for almost a decade now. Today, we're going to talk about a set of artifacts that all come from the same future. And this is one where we've asked the question, what if we have artificial intelligence, and it's widely adopted, and that artificial intelligence has made contact with animals that live in the world, and they've teamed up together to start to engage in commerce and opening new businesses and providing services for not only people, but also for other animals. So these artifacts were all created in Workshop. It was a partnership with Autodesk, which is a manufacturing software company here in the Bay Area. So the first artifact that we're going to talk about today is the SmartBone that will pair with your SmartBone Fetch Finder app on the phone. Imagine you're walking in a park and a dog approaches you with this SmartBone and it's offering to play fetch. It's just like any other gig economy service like Uber or Lyft. Essentially when the dog approaches you and it pairs, you're going to engage in a financial transaction and the dog will provide a service. When the SmartBone pairs with your phone, it's going to bring up an app that offers different fetch packages. The first fetch, of course, is free, but after that you're going to have to pay. You can get the Buddy Buddy package where you get 10 fetches and you have a friendly and playful dog. That costs 2 bones a day. Or you can get the Man's Best Friend package where you have unlimited fetching, it'll respond by name. You have friendly companion and defense, and it also isn't going to poop on your lawn. So you might be wondering, what does a dog do once it gets money? That's a great question. None of us really know yet. This physical artifact here that you can pick up and hold is not just a bone, it's an interactive experience. If somebody encounters this in the real world, they can tap it with their phone, and it pairs with the NFC to bring up a web page. And so you'll get like a simulation of the real experience of what not only an artifact from the future, but an app from the future looks and feels like. As an artist, I hope the people who encounter this artifact out in the world walk away thinking about a totally different future where humans and animals exist more on a peer level, where there's mutually beneficial relationships between both. And this might sound like a totally crazy fantasy, but based on signals we're seeing today, artificial intelligence and brain interfaces with animals, it is theoretically plausible. The next artifact we're going to look at is the bacon extruder. It's set in the same world as the smart bone. The year is 2028. Artificial intelligence and cybernetically augmented pigs have teamed up to make money on lab-grown meat. After centuries of factory farming, the pigs are fed up with exploitation by humans. With help from the latest animal-computer interfaces and artificial intelligent collaborators, the pigs are able to design and manufacture a countertop bacon extruder. The machine is charged with proprietary capsules that contain pig DNA and all of the required growing nutrients, similar to how a Keurig coffee maker works, but for extruding bacon. In this world, the pig's artificially intelligent lawyers have secured rights over all pig DNA, making it illegal for third parties to sell any pig products without consent and expensive licensing fees paid to the pigs. In this future, the only way to eat bacon is through this proprietary system that ultimately makes the pigs filthy rich. Because this artifact has a little bit more of an involved story, I thought that it was important to embed some of that story in the artifact itself. And so there's a screen that is controlled by a Raspberry Pi, and there's a little knob where you can kind of scoot through the different interfaces. The first one just has branding for countertop meats and explains that it's a bacon extruder. The second one has a readout of the process of the bacon being extruded. It's kind of like what you would have on a medical readout. And the third interface has that background story. People's reaction to this artifact so far has been really divided. Some people are fully supportive of the pigs owning rights over their own bodies and making money off of that, while other people think that that is, just totally unacceptable, that an animal has control over its own body and is allowed to make money. This is a sign of a good artifact, one that's going to provoke discussion and debate and really get a conversation started about what that future would be like and whether or not it's one that we want to live in. The third artifact we're going to talk about today is this jar of honey. It may look like just a regular jar of honey, but it's got this sticker right here that says Global Pollinators Union. So in this world where artificial intelligence has teamed up with different types of animals, in this case they've teamed up with honeybees to help make an environment that is more conducive to honeybee rights and safer for the whole world. With this union, pollinators around the world were able to rapidly curb negative trends such as excessive agricultural pesticide use and fragile large-scale monocropping. Some local unions are avidly against the use of genetically modified organisms, while other unions have offered to assist in the administration of modified pollens. The label on this jar of honey says Global Pollinators Union, organic and GMO-free. It's certified. So this artifact makes you wonder, what happens when we live in a world where honeybees have organized a labor movement to protect not only the rights of honeybees, but the environment that they're gathering the honey from? This artifact is a great example of very easy to make. Literally, all that I did was take a piece of tape and write on it with a Sharpie. So if you don't have access to a 3D printer or the ability to program a Raspberry Pi, or you don't have the time to carve a dog bone, you can just write on a piece of tape and stick it on an existing product and go out there and start a conversation. The most fun thing about being an artifact designer is getting to imagine any world you want. You have complete freedom. You're not constrained by the politics or the social norms of today, and you can really just go wild in any direction. When I'm starting to make a new artifact, sometimes the idea just comes out of nowhere. and it's mostly fully formed. In that case, it's pretty easy to go through and just, start to make it out of whatever material you have available. That doesn't always happen though. In a lot of cases, you really have to work for an artifact. The process of going through, gathering signals, combining those signals in interesting ways, and then really prototyping, making lots of different iterations of it, building on it. Once I have a prototype of an artifact, it's really useful to carry it around with you and talk with anybody you see to see if they understand it, first of all, if it makes sense. And is it something that's going to really start a discussion? Is it something that has multiple interpretations? Is it something that's polarizing in some way? One thing you want to be careful about is not offending people. You always want to have equally represented viewpoints if you're dealing with controversial subjects. Public spaces, definitely, like Piazza, park, out next to a cafe where everybody's walking by. I think that a lot of times these ideas are, stuck inside of science fiction. It's like not everybody has the time to read a science fiction book, or it's in an academic institution, or in the closed doors of a corporation's boardroom or whatever. And so I think that putting these artifacts out there in public places where anybody can walk by and experience it is really ideal. Thanks for tuning in to this session on how to make artifacts from the future. Once again, I'm Nicholas Weininger with the Institute for the Future. And if you have a chance to make artifacts, if you're inspired to do so, please share it here on Coursera and on social media with the whole world.
Here's one of my favorite mantras about the future from the futurist Barbara Marx Hubbard. She said, "The future exists first in imagination, then in will, then in reality." You've come so far in the specialization. We practiced all of our imagination and creativity to imagine futures we want. We talked about how to get insight about those futures, how to make them better for everyone. Now we are in the stage of action. And in this final week's content, I want to share with you two of the most effective tools that we have in our Futurist Toolkit to make sure that we're not just thinking about the future, but we are acting on the future. This week, we're going to look at how to build an action roadmap to the future and how to make a pledge to make the future. You can use these tools for yourself or with any group or community that you want to inspire to join you in the journey to make the future you want. I can't wait to practice them with you. I'll see you in the next video with my colleague, Vanessa Mason, who's going to show us how to make an action roadmap for the future.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Mason, and I'm a research director at Institute for the Future. I focus on the future of health and well-being, and today I'm going to teach you how to use the Action Roadmap tool. I use this tool when I know my preferred future, and I'm really looking to uncover what actions I need to take in the present to work toward my preferred future. You might find this tool helpful if you're feeling a little overwhelmed or kind of daunted by your preferred future, and I find that this tool is really helpful first, to help you look at what actions you can take over time. So it's set up so that we have short, medium, and long-term actions that you can take. The second thing that I really like about this tool, and why you might find this tool really helpful too, is that you can break up tasks into easy and difficult. So there are tasks that you can do right now that are very simple. There's also things that may be more complex but very impactful for moving towards your preferred future in the longer term months in years that you may be working on your preferred future. And the last thing that I really like about this tool is that it gives you a lot of space. You have the opportunity to be able to generate as many ideas as you can think about, whether you're working alone, whether you're working within your organization or your community or within your country to generate ideas about how to achieve this preferred future. You have the opportunity to generate a lot of different suggestions and create many different pathways toward your preferred future. So let's take a look at the tool. Ready to build your action roadmap? Here's how it works. First, make a list of goals and positive outcomes in your preferred future. Remember, a preferred future is your description of a future you want to actively work towards. You might have one big goal in mind for this future. Or, there are 10 things you'd like to be true in the future that aren't true today. There's lots of space here to describe your preferred future. Use as little or as much of it as you like. Next, grab some sticky notes or index cards. On each note or card, write one action you could take to make any of your goals more achievable. It's a good idea to include easy actions you could take today, as well as bigger actions that will require a lot of work and planning. This is the most important step, so take as long as you need. A good roadmap will have a dozen possible actions or more. Now, place your potential actions on the roadmap according to how soon you'll be ready to take them. Actions you can take right away go on the far left side in the column marked short term. Actions that need more time, a few months, or even a few years, go in the middle column. Actions that could be many years in the making go in the far right column marked long term. Finally, rearrange your potential actions on the roadmap according to how easy or difficult you think they will be to achieve. Easy actions go above the middle line. Difficult actions go below the middle line. When you have a first draft of your action roadmap complete, it's the perfect time to share it with others. Ask them to suggest more actions you could take, or any goals or outcomes they would add to further refine your preferred future. While you're waiting for feedback, go ahead and start taking the easiest, most short-term action you've put on the roadmap. And that's how you make your preferred future real. Welcome back. I'm Vanessa, and I'm here with Suzanne, an expert on the future of emerging new media. Suzanne's going to tell us about a project that she's been working on, and we're going to demo the Build an Action Roadmap tool with her project.
Great, thanks for having me, Vanessa. I'm so excited to use this tool. So we're currently working on a project around re-entry into society for newly released prisoners. We've done a little kind of prototype pilot project already on this, and we've noticed that there's a lot of attraction. So we would like to explore this further. And the goal is really to decrease the number of prisoners that go back into prison. So today there's about 30% of people that end up back in prisons. And by 2030, we want to cut that in half. So we want to roll this out to about 100 cities and see if we can, decrease this number. So that is my end goal, and I'm hoping you can help me get there.
Sure. So tell me, what sort of emerging new media are you working with? How does this work to help prevent people from coming back into prison?
So the prototype project or pilot project that we ran used virtual reality to do that, and it placed people into real life situations that they're going to face when they exit prison. To help them, understand what those situations are and practice, how they can behave. So it could be stressful situations, like what happens when you're applying for a job and they ask you if you've been incarcerated before, and how should you go about those things, or even introducing new types of technologies that they've never seen. So we're hoping to use VR to help, simulate those types of situations so that they can practice those ahead of time.
I love that. It's a quintessential future. Practicing so we can anticipate.
It's definitely an urgent future that we want to help.
Okay, so your preferred future, if, I'm trying to make sure I'm clear, is by 2030 you want to cut the reentry rate, which right now is 30%, you want to cut that in half by 2030.
Right, that's the goal.
Right.
So people that go back into prison, exactly.
All right, well I see you have a few different action steps here. We're going to use this tool to help map out what you need to do. So why don't you tell me about what would be a good easy short-term step?
So first of all, we already know there's a lot of attraction around this because we did that initial initial kind of prototype. So I would want to kind of rally my allies. So I want to reach out on social media, which is a platform I use a lot, and see, what are people doing in this space? So what is other people thinking of? How can I, get my partners already from that, that source? So I have as my kind of short-term easy step is to start doing that.
Okay.
I also want to get in touch with, people that are newly released and what are the issues that they're facing, so that we can truly ground the simulations in those stories. So that's also part of this kind of short-term action step.
Wonderful. I think rally a network is something that all of us can do as a really good first step for working towards our preferred future. So what might be something that's more difficult that's in the short term, sort of 1 to 2 years?
So another thing, I work in a media lab, in an emerging media lab where we're looking at this technology. So I would want to put together more of these scenarios and more of these simulations. So create these VR simulations based on, input that I'm getting from these interviews and from my partners and allies. So that's a little bit harder. It will take a little bit more. We need to find developers to do that. But yeah, I think it's doable. We already have a few in line that we've done before, so we can, get those rolling again, get more of those out there. So that's a kind of short-term, more difficult step.
Okay, so building a prototype based on what you're learning from rallying your network.
Exactly.
Definitely a logical next action step. So what do you think would come next for your midterm easy?
So obviously when we have these, I'm thinking when we have these scenarios that we would want to roll those out somehow. So I want to get it out to maybe about, start with 10 to 20 cities that we can get in touch with to try this and see, can we actually, is this helping? So rolling it out is basically what I'm thinking, and hopefully for, 10 to 20 cities that we can get on board to start testing this system, testing this prototype.
Great, that sounds like a good step to take, 5 years out, 10 to 20 cities. All right, well, what do you think would come next after you've got this program with virtual reality in 10 to 20 cities, really helping with reentry? What comes next?
So obviously, we don't know a lot about this tech necessarily yet. We don't have a lot of data on the impact of using some of these tools. So I want to make sure that we, evaluate the program. So it's going to take a little while. So that's why I'm thinking of this as midterm. If we're looking at it like a 10-year perspective, it's going to take time to see, are we actually decreasing the number of people that end up back into prison? So evaluation is what I wrote that I was thinking that we would do. So kind of evaluating that program.
Okay. So I've heard a lot about virtual reality and just a lot of emerging tech generally, and there's just a lot of privacy and security concerns. Do you think that that's something that you also need to do in your evaluation?
Right. Yes, that's a great point. Yes, that's true. A lot of this technology you can track like biometrics data. You can see what people are looking at. So that would be very important. I'm gonna add it here. Okay. So we would have to do privacy and ethics evaluations, I think. Sure. So I'm gonna do. Great. Yes.
Yes. I think it's a great use of our network
too.
Yeah.
So we would have to make sure there's anonymity in the data, and if we draw conclusions around it, we can't find out specifically who we're talking about. For example, I think that's really important. Thanks for pointing that out.
Of course.
That's great.
What do you think could be a good, easy, long-term step? Like what?
I actually don't know for sure about that one. I know we obviously, if we're successful with the evaluation and we know this is working, we need to, get buy-in from policymakers. So that would be like, the final, before I'm hoping we would reach that goal of decreasing the number of people that go back. So I don't think this is easy, but we want to, scale the program somehow.
Okay.
And get buy-in from policymakers.
Well, how about, policymakers respond a lot to the public, obviously supporting things. So what about something like a documentary? Like you have a lot of results, you're going to have some really powerful, deep, profound stories from the families affected by this. What do you think about making
I think that's a great idea. Right. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, definitely creating, including media and including those types of media forms to help gain that interest from the public and also from the policymakers. So that's perfect, yes. And that could probably be like an easier step. Great. So now that we have all that buy-in from media and documentaries, hopefully we can, get the policymakers to notice that this is a successful program.
Sure.
And we can scale this up to, 100 cities and get this going and keep evaluating it so that we can hit that mark of lowering it down to 15%.
Yes, I think that that's a fantastic last action step to take. So, you've used this tool now. What was that like for you? I think
it's really helpful, and it's really helpful to see this visually because I can kind of imagining what to do now, and also getting some of these missing points so that I can connect the dots so that I can actually get to the policymakers creating change and actually having these programs available. So this was a great tool for me. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Wonderful. Well, there you have it. We've now wrapped up demoing our Bills in Action roadmap tool. So hope that you can take this and go forth and build your own preferred future. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Tessa Finlove. I'm a research director here at Institute for the Future. And my work through the years has been a mix of both researching what the future could look like on a very wide range of topics, as well as facilitating different groups of people, different communities around the world to imagine a range of possible futures for their region, their city, their country. And I've also been teaching futures thinking skills using our Futures Thinking Toolkit. So I wanted to talk to you all today about participatory futures and the way that we can work with different communities to envision their own future. And the beauty of this kind of process is that I'm not the expert in anyone else's future. Nobody is an expert in anyone else's future. We're all experts in our own future. And that means that the future becomes an equalizing landscape to imagine new possibilities, to truly imagine what's possible. And so what this means is that the future, because the future doesn't exist, it's a safe space to bring together people who are not used to having a shared conversation. And this can be both people who are maybe coming from different sides of the same ecosystem, or they could be people who are actually enmeshed in conflict. And the future can become a place to begin crafting a shared language, a shared framework for understanding what's possible. And from there, new trust can be built, and new relationships can be built, and new projects can come out of that. So I wanted to talk to you all about a couple projects that I've done through the years that help illustrate what I mean by participatory futures and what it means to use futures thinking as a safe space to imagine what's possible, to create new friendships, new relationships, and even to create new social enterprises or civic engagement projects that you see as being really important to the community and the place that you live. Back in 2011, I had the pleasure of working with the Institute of Economic Affairs in Kenya to help facilitate some scenario building workshops on the future of youth in Kenya. And so for the project, we organized about 9 regional scenario building workshops with youth leaders in Kenya to help them develop their own scenarios on what the future of youth in their region would look like. And what we discovered in this work, the beauty of this kind of work, is that the people who participated in these workshops, and they were for 3 days and about 20 people per workshop, so they were intimate cohorts. The people who participated, they gained a lot in terms of both the ability to, for 3 days, sit and only sit with thinking about the future of their region, the future of their country and their home, what the future could look like, what are the important drivers impacting the future of their area, and what are the things that they can do to help make the future what they want it to be. And so what we found is that after conducting all of these regional scenario building workshops, many of the participants, they formed new friendships, they formed new alliances, new work collaborations. Some went off to start new careers because they were so taken by some of the ideas that came up in the scenario building workshops that they felt like on fire, lit up to go ahead and actually start building the future that they preferred. And that is one of the most exciting things about participatory foresight, because in many ways it's a luxury to be able to spend multiple days not worrying about your day-to-day, not having to go to work, not having to cook for your family, keep the house clean. Just sit and imagine the future of your region, the future of your home, and from there think through, well, what is the future that I want? What is the future that we want? And how can we start making that future happen today? When we were running the participatory futures workshops in Kenya, we found some really interesting outcomes from the regional workshops. We found that in northern Kenya, young people were particularly concerned about access to identification, essentially the right to be legally recognized as a Kenyan. On the coast of Kenya, we found that young people were particularly concerned with the amount of drugs and drug addiction and conspiracy theories that the Kenyan government was purposefully putting drugs into the coast as a way to keep the population sedated. And so what you get out of these kinds of participatory futures workshops is really nuanced information about the current challenges, so that if you're thinking about what to do to make the future better for that region, you have a much more kind of practical way to start. What are the projects, what are the programs, what are the ideas that you need to develop further? In northern Kenya, it might not be just access to jobs, it might be access to identification. What you'll find as a futurist, if you engage in participatory futures projects where you can bring together different stakeholders to imagine the future of their region through whatever lens is appropriate, whether it's youth or environment or work, whatever it might be, participants are going to come out of that kind of engagement with new ideas about what's possible and new energy to build the future that is preferred. The other thing that you'll find if you're able to do participatory futures work is that it is, because it's a safe place, it becomes a vessel for bringing together individuals or communities who are in conflict. It becomes a space for adversaries to find common ground. And I'll give you an example of this. Back in 2015 and 16, I did some work in Sudan with the United Nations Development Program in Sudan. And we ran a series of different kinds of conferences and workshops and events to bring the futures perspective in the context of this work, into peace building and sustainable development. And again, I am not an expert in Sudan. And I could read up on Sudan as much as I would like, but I'm still never going to be an expert in Sudan in the same way that a Sudanese person who's grown up in Sudan will be. And so the most effective way to do work on the future of Sudan in that case is to devise a project, design workshops which allow Sudanese people from different strata of society to imagine a range of possible futures, both good and bad, in order to use those futures to drive towards the one that they would like. So part of our work for UNDP Sudan was to bring together peace builders and help the peace builders imagine what Sudan could look like in 2030, depending on whether or not there is a continuation of conflict or if there's a move towards sustainable peace. We also ran regional grassroots scenario building workshops to understand what sustainable development will look like in Sudan. And in a country like Sudan, there are two demographics or groups that struggle to see eye to eye. And I learned all about this from doing the actual work there. So in Sudan, as is the case in a lot of countries, there's a lot of reverence and respect for elders. And that also means that elders don't necessarily want to sit at an equal table with youth and hear what it is that youth have to say about Sudan and the future and what's possible. But I did find that in this work, young people and elders were able to come together and find a common ground. And I heard from young people, oh my God, Tessa, wow, this is the first time I've been able to have a truly equal conversation with elders where we were able to find common ground. The Sudan scenarios we created with Sudanese peace builders who are Sudanese peace builders living and working in conflict regions. We brought them together in Khartoum, in the capital of Sudan, and had them in their regional groups create two scenarios. One of continuation, which is saying, what is the future of our region going to look like in 2030 if things continue in the way that they're continuing now? If we see more of what we're seeing now, what is that going to look like in 2030? Because it will be different. Even if it's more of the same, it's going to be different when it's in 2030. And the second scenario was one of transformation. What happens if we're able to transform what's currently happening into a different kind of future? What might that future look like? And we had the peace builders take a persona. One person that they defined during the actual date of the scenarios in 2016, and they took that persona and they ran that person through both scenarios. So they said, what is the life of this individual in the continuation scenario in 2030? And what is the life of this individual in the transformation scenario in 2030? As a way to explore the human impact of the future within both scenarios and to get a real sense for the divergence of transformation and continuation. And the interesting thing that happened is that many of the participants came and said that the continuation scenario was the hardest one because they're not used to thinking about that. Every day they're fighting for transformation. And that's the case for anyone who is in social change, whether it's peace building or sustainable development or social entrepreneurship. You're in the process of building a future that is radically different from today. But sometimes the future is going to look a lot like today. And as a resilience measure, it's important to draw out what those futures could look like so that you can gain resilience in that world and continue to work towards the transformation scenario that you prefer. The other thing is that for anyone who is in the social change space, you are actively building a future that's radically different from today. But it's really hard to do that. As humans, we don't really have that capacity naturally. We build futures based on our present and our historical context. So giving actual space, time and space for people to systematically imagine a range of possible futures so that we can truly build towards an alternative world that is perhaps more equitable, more fair, more just, more peaceful, more sustainable, is a really critical and important thing that we need to be doing more and more throughout the world. The last project I would like to talk to you about is our Equitable Futures Toolkit, which we adapted from our Foresight Training Toolkit. And the Equitable Futures Toolkit is designed specifically to help anyone, anywhere in the world, imagine a more equitable future. The reason why we did this is because as humans, as a human society, we seem to struggle to understand, to imagine what a truly equitable future could look like. So this toolkit is available for all of you, for anyone to download, and you can use this to have conversations around what a more equitable future could look like with friends and family, if you are that kind of a person, with students, young people who aren't used to talking about equity. You can also use the toolkit to have conversations and generate actual scenarios around the future of equity for organizations, foundations, companies who are interested in this issue, but don't necessarily take the time to truly think through what the long-term vision for equity really is. And this is a really difficult and important step, because you'll find if you talk to people about equity, even organizations who are mission aligned, who think about equity, they'll say a more equitable future looks like a future where there's justice and fairness, and that doesn't really tell us anything. That doesn't highlight the path from here to there. And so the toolkit is there to help us become more nuanced and descriptive in the way we actually describe and understand what equity could look like. What does it look like for me as a human to live in a world that's more equitable? What does this really mean? Does it mean I can walk around at night without having to worry about my safety? Does it mean I can have more children without having to worry about paying for childcare? What are the actual lived experiences of a more equitable world? The more we can start to tell scenarios that draw out that future, the more we'll be able to actively build that world for all of us. So use this toolkit for a range of audiences. Whether it's you want to talk about equity with people who aren't used to talking about it, this toolkit's for you. If you want to work with companies or organizations that are already thinking about equity, but you would like to give them a space and a time to think systematically around what that future could look like in order to inform strategy today, this toolkit could help with that too. In summary, as future futurists, I recommend thinking about how to create participatory future processes in order to engage communities and organizations and companies around the world in your area to think about the future of where they are, the future of their industry, the future of their community. And participatory futures in general is a fantastic framework and avenue to build trust, build community trust, to create new alliances and relationships, to find common ground among people who don't trust each other or don't see eye to eye. And it becomes a great avenue to spark new imagination, new social enterprise, new civic engagement projects. And it is a fundamentally necessary tool for anybody involved in social change at any level. And with that, I would like to leave you all with a quote from Thomas Sankara. You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from non-conformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future.
Imagine Sudan in 2030. Go ahead, take a second. What do you see?
Perhaps you see a booming business where you can order oranges from Jabal Marra online. Do you see a new generation of social entrepreneurs and youth leaders from all regions of Sudan spurring growth and unity? Do you see youth in Al Jazeera creating local and modern versions of Mashrou' Al Jazeera, exporting cash crops to the Middle East and Europe?
Perhaps you see Sudan once again has accessible world-leading university, education, and a society focused on knowledge sharing.
Do you see the sanctions being lifted and the new international trade talks being led by a Sudanese woman?
What does it mean to be Sudanese in 2030? Maybe you see our famous hospitality and sense of community extended across all tribes and regions as we end tribalism and conflicts in Darfur, Blue Nile, and South Kordofan? Or will we only become more fragmented?
The best thing about the future is that it has not been written yet. There are no facts about the future, only possibilities. We have an opportunity today to think systematically about alternative futures for Sudan so that we can begin to create the futures we want. After all, we must identify the landscape of possible destinations before we can forge a path to get there.
Systematically thinking about possible futures will help us build an inclusive vision for Sudan 2030, achieve sustainable human development, and build wiser futures. The future is an open world that has yet to be drawn. If we do not draw our own future, others will draw it for us. And as we step beyond the constraints of today, we find a safe space for thinking together and exploration. We immerse ourselves in new possibilities and find new solutions to old problems. We may even find surprising new allies and unexpected areas of agreement.
The future is a common ground among all communities. No matter how fragmented we are, we share the future and hopes and dreams about what the future may hold. Systematically thinking about possible futures can help us build dialogue, understanding, and trust. It can help us bring fragmented communities together.
Systematically thinking about possible futures can help us prepare as a country and a community for the coming challenges of the decades ahead. By understanding the whole range of possible futures, we will build resilience in uncertain and volatile times.
As we work together to achieve our shared vision of 2030, we will be empowered to build a Sudan we all want.
The challenges we face as we work together to build wiser, preferred futures for Sudan are large and foreboding. But building an inclusive vision for Sudan calls us to engage directly with our fears and the complexity of our society. If we apply the tools of foresight, we will better understand ourselves and be able to begin the hard work of building a Sudan in 2030 that works for everyone. Quoting الشيخ فرح والتيك توك: باكر السفر بالبيوت والكلام بالخيوط.
If you want to make a change in your own life, what's a really powerful trick to make sure that you actually do it? Well, psychologists have figured out that if you publicly commit to doing something, if you tell your friends and family and colleagues that you are going to quit smoking or start a band or write a book or meditate every day for 30 days, the more that you share that commitment with the world, the more accountable you will feel to following through. You will imagine all of the positive reactions that your friends and colleagues have when you actually achieve it, and that will give you a little extra willpower and motivation. And it turns out that when it comes to shaping and influencing the future, the same technique is really powerful. If you want to make sure that you follow through on all of the amazing foresight and insight that you've developed in this course, if you want to leave the specialization with that momentum and willpower you need to start shaping the future for real, making a pledge, making a public commitment to shape the future in a practical, concrete way is a really great way to ensure that you take that step forward. So that's why we're sharing with you this particular tool. This is in your Equitable Futures Toolkit. This is the last tool in the toolkit. And this is a way for you to decide what is the next action you can take, something real, something achievable, and you want to make a public commitment to taking that step. If you look at the tool, you'll see it's very grounded, it's very practical. You say the date you plan to complete this action by, you acknowledge any potential barriers or obstacles that might get in the way. You state why this is important to you, why this really matters to you, and when it comes to shaping the future. And you sign it, and you even have a witness sign it, somebody bearing witness to your desire to make a better future. I want to invite you to use this tool. Maybe you feel like you can use it today. Maybe you want to let it sit and simmer a little bit. Maybe you want to gather 100 of your closest friends and all make a pledge to make the future together this weekend. You can use this tool however you want. I encourage you, anytime you get really inspired by a preferred future, by a vision for the future, by a forecast or scenario that you want to respond to today with urgent optimism, use this tool to define a course of action for yourself and to bring others along on this journey to the future with you. And of course, any pledge that you make, share it with your Coursera community. We would love to see that commitment and honor you as you put in that effort to make the future. We did it. This is the end of the specialization on futures thinking. You've completed all 5 courses, moving through foresight to insight to action. This has been an incredible journey. I'm so glad to have gotten the chance to know you in the discussion forums and through these assignments. And I'm really looking forward to you becoming a member of the Futures community. There are lots of ways you can do that. With the Institute for the Future, we have a newsletter that you can subscribe to, and we're sending out signals and we're sharing new forecasts and sharing immersive scenarios. All you have to do is go to the Institute for the Future website. That's iftf.org. Subscribe to the newsletter, and we will continue the conversation. If you want to really level up these skills and really pursue a career or a practice professionally as a futurist, we offer foresight trainings. We can certify you. You can come to the Institute in Palo Alto for a few days, get your certification. We also do these trainings all over the world, from Helsinki to Singapore. So if you come to iftf.org, you can see our schedule of professional trainings and certifications. We would love to see you in that capacity. This has been an amazing journey. You are ready to make the future. You are ready to adapt, to invent, to create, and to make a difference. And I can't wait to see the future that you make.